Hello everyone, my name is Nikki and today we're going to talk about Angular not versus React. Now a bit of a background before I start. I'm a developer with roughly 2 years of experience. For 1 year I used Angular while I worked at Beaton and then I switched to Fraktio, but I started learning React kind of midway thanks to Pekis. And now, having tasted both technologies, I want to share my perspective from the person who's not a hardcore developer, who is not that type of guy who sits and codes a full product in 1 day, but more like jack of all trades, but a master of none, yet still better than a master of one. So with that out of the way, I want to also say that this is open to discussion at any point, and if you have a question mid-presentation, please do ask. There is no need to be afraid to interrupt or anything. So without further ado, let's begin. So one thing I want to get out of the way straight away is, do I really have to pick a JavaScript framework? Well, you don't. Be it a framework or a library, I want to make one thing clear. Since I'm talking about opinionated perspective here, you're allowed to use whatever that does the job. Like, you're not questioning whether this hammer is better than this one. You're just using the one that's currently in your possession and you use it to hammer down the nail. So the same thing with the JavaScript framework. If you have a possibility of choosing, just use whatever you're comfortable with. So as I mentioned before, you don't need to. These are just tools. So whether you pick React or Angular is totally up to you. And both do their job really well in their certain aspects. So what I want to cover here is to take two perspectives and see what Angular does well, what React does well, and what can one learn from the other. Now, for the sake of simplicity, it's easier to say what React can add from Angular, because React being a library, it's easy to extend, unlike Angular. So for the most part, even when I say, hey, React could take that, I'm saying it because it's easier to do it in React than in Angular. But the interpretation goes both ways. So whenever I say something React does well, I think Angular can implement that, be it a concept or actual technology. So to quickly cover through, React is basically pure JavaScript, so you'll learn JavaScript by doing. There's very limited amount of stuff you need to learn about React. Basically, the moment you learn how the render method works, you can hook it up and go. There's your first React website, so not much going on. Minimal footprint, and it's easy to add new libraries. This is like the greatest thing, because you can grab any project, you can add React to it if it didn't have React before, and the very same way you can pick any other library, be it Lodash or whatever that you want to use. Angular, on the other hand, is a framework. So a framework entails that it's like a tool set. So it comes with all the bells and whistles pre-installed. So you don't need to fish for HTTP clients. You don't need to look for something that manipulates the DOM or whatever that it may be. 99% cases, Angular already has everything out of the box, assuming we're not talking about like font awesome or any icon sets. Obviously, those have to be added either projects. Now, Angular is like a first-class citizen when it comes to TypeScript. They decided to go with that technology compared to AngularJS, which was written in JavaScript. And in my opinion, that's a big plus because it adds type safety by default and it enforces good behavior. I know that a lot of people are going to like scream and shout, TypeScript takes a lot of time, and I hear you. But TypeScript was never meant to make you a fast developer. It was made to make you an efficient developer, like bug-free developer. So that's definitely kind of a plus, even though it takes a bit more time to get used to. Angular has one of the best CLIs you can ever find to date. When you generate a project with Angular CLI, it has tons of options. You can, for example, disable testing. If you don't like CSS and you like Sass, you can enable Sass less. You can actually even omit TypeScript and switch purely to JavaScript. There's a lot of talks about adding possibility to Dart and compile using Dart files instead. And they have a lot of stuff like AOT compilation ahead of time. So it has a lot of potential. When you're building it, you're not thinking what you're doing, and you can extend it even further based on whatever that you wish to do. Definitely, we're going to cover the CLI in just a bit later. RxJS, also another citizen. Like, who have heard of RxJS? Well, pretty much everyone. Yeah, nice. So Angular decided to go with RxJS instead of standard HTTP like .fetch or Axios or whatever. And in my opinion, it added a bit of a complexity, I'm not gonna lie. It really made it a bit harder to understand than just making a standard promise-based request. But they're really powerful and they really shine when it comes to real-time data. So I'm gonna be talking about RxJS a little bit as well. And it has great out-of-the-box component communication. Much like React, it's also very simple to communicate between components, so this point kind of goes both ways. But in my opinion, when you take off Redux from React and you don't take NGRX, if I remember correctly, NG Store, sorry, from Angular, Angular has a bit of a better implementation when it comes to services to share component data. For example, if components are too far apart from each other, it's easier to communicate through observables and the service rather than with React where you need to wrap a bunch of things together. Well, at least that's, correct me if I'm wrong, that's why I'm here. So if I said something stupid, please mention that. Otherwise, let's see a bit of a code. So let's start with the first point that I want to also address, this TypeScript as flow. Now I didn't write it versus flow, that's a bit of a TypeScript inside joke how you can type it. But basically TypeScript, React could learn a bit from TypeScript, and not in the sense of React specifically, but you can add TypeScript to your projects. And the reason being is that you can see the amount of packages that you need for TypeScript and the amount of packages that you need for Flow, because you need to add Babel, you need to configure Babel. There's Webpack for production, for development, and there's different edge cases that you need to do. With TypeScript, you need a Webpack, obviously, for both cases. You need TypeScript and also TypeScript loader for Webpack. And then there is a TSC config that I'm going to show you here that is very easy to manipulate to get the result that you want. Now, unfortunately, I don't have mirror working, so this is going to be me looking like this back and forth all the time. But this is basically TypeScript config in a nutshell. So much like Babel, when you configure something to transpile it to a specific JavaScript version, be it ES6, ES7, ES5, ES4, ES3, I don't judge, you can do the same thing with TSC, except you don't need to do any Webpack configuration whatsoever. All the configuration is in this small JSON file where you do stuff like compile and save when you save the file, out your source maps, declaration, your target. And then if you're doing some node development, you can switch to module resolutions of node. If you're doing only front end, then you can switch to different module resolution, classic or ES6. So it really kind of helps, in my opinion, at least from the newbie perspective, it really helps you to streamline the process. Like if something doesn't work, you just need to change a little bit of config, where you need to dive into Babel and Webpack if you want to do a different target development. At least when I tried to do it with Webpack, it felt a bit more complex than managing one file that does everything for you. Another thing is that a lot of people pointed out is Flow easier to integrate or maybe easier to write. Well, it is just as equally to integrate TypeScript into your project. Now, it doesn't have to be Angular, it can be React as well. You just add a TypeScript, and then there is this TSC config option that you can select, where you can allow JavaScript files. You can allow any value to be passed. Because by default, TypeScript is kind of enforcing. It wants you to type stuff. It wants you to let you know what the value of this, what it's going to be, if it's ever going to be. But then you can kind of lessen the grip by not enforcing like strict rules, by not enforcing type safety. And recently, the biggest argument was that Flow lets you see some like basic weak typing. If you don't type anything, it can still know, okay, you're trying to assign a string to a number or the other way around. TypeScript recently caught up with that too, and they're offering basic support. It's still kind of, I have to agree, not on par with Flow, but it's going there. And the more and more TypeScript is invested into, the more it catches up with Flow. Another thing I discovered while browsing the interwebs is that performance is also kind of a bit of a concern. Now, we are talking milliseconds, but it's kind of like it became like a race who can do it the fastest. And according to the latest research, when you have Flow, it is much slower to transpile than TypeScript. Now, I don't have any claims to back it up other than a website that did the whole benchmarking. I can link it to you at the end of the description. But basically, this is something that if you're a performance geek or you're obsessed with getting every last millisecond of the compilation process, you can go with TypeScript instead. Now, there's a bunch of cool things I can talk about with TypeScript, but I'm gonna leave it till the end of the presentation if you want to hear more about the development, about the integration, and kind of more personal experiences. But to keep it on point, the presentation right now, I definitely recommend going with TypeScript over Flow, even though Flow is kind of designed with Facebook, for React, sorry. Now, to go back to here. Beautiful, right? So at the top, we have React, how we can iterate through items. And then at the bottom, we have Angular. Now, I really find both ways easy to understand. But why I do slightly prefer, because you can put your headphones on just in case, so you don't need to listen to this. I like the Angular way a little bit more. And that comes from the fact that I like separation of concern. Now, before you jump on me and say React has separation of concern as well, I mean it in a way that I like HTML being .html, I like TypeScript to be .ts, and CSS to be .css, although I have to admit I fell in love with styled components, and I wish Angular would have something similar as well. But the reason why I like this is, again, because it separates the concern. I have an object items in my TypeScript, and I don't need to manipulate it in any way like I have to do it in React. Like I have to map through, and I have to return each and single item, and then have it as inside the, for example, unordered list. In Angular, I simply run ng4 directive, and I say, hey, let item, which is the same as initializing a variable, be of items. So it's essentially running the map command for me, and it maps the whole thing and projects the DOM. Now, the key difference here, where React is better, is because it keeps track of stuff better than Angular due to the fact that React uses shadow DOM. Angular doesn't use shadow DOM. So it operates directly on the DOM, which is far more expensive than operating on the shadow DOM. So this is where kind of the performance of Angular suffers compared to React. They're catching up slowly, but if you're looking for a more performance solution, it is way better to use React for small data sets, but it is better to use Angular for bigger data sets because you can do the same thing and it's much more efficient to iterate through. There has been, like, again, a benchmark of 10,000 divs, and Angular's initial render was much longer than React's, but Angular's re-render was much faster than React's. Again, I can show you at the end of the presentation. Things could have changed already since it's been, like, what, 4 months since I used React last time? So maybe React caught up, and we'll see in the version 16, maybe this whole presentation will go down the drain. Hey, let's talk about involvement. So part of the success of React is because Facebook is heavily invested into its ecosystem. So let's not talk code about here. And because of that, it gets far more retention, not only from the company, but from the development community, because they can see that the Facebook is right behind React and they want to push it as far ahead as possible. Whether with Angular, like, the situation is far worse. I'm only aware of AdSense website. I heard there's like a second website made by Google that is also using Angular, but from my understanding, AdSense only is like the biggest one of them. And that's the only one that uses Angular. So the impression that Angular gives is that Google as a company is still not ready to make the switch. Now, one could argue Google is in general slow when releasing new products. If you've ever followed like redesign of Google Calendar, it just came to pass. So this could explain why Google still haven't switched to Angular. But in my opinion, it kind of shows a bad picture for Google. So this is something where Google could learn from Facebook/React. They could just jump straight into their framework, start using it, find those edge cases and issues that are in the framework and improve it. Because I strongly believe that the framework can be 10 times better if Google just jumps in and sees, hey, this doesn't work, we need to fix this. Otherwise, they'll never find those issues. That's pretty much it when it comes to involvement. Now, tooling, like I said, Angular has great tooling and all the bells out of the whistles added. So let me show you kind of the power of such tooling. Let me see if I can open up here. Yes, so in here I have my regular stuff. Like, can you see anything?
You got text, please.
Yes. Let me see. Can I do it like this? Oh yeah, I can. Big enough? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Good. Let me. That's fine. I can keep it like this. So when you install Angular, you do your regular, and I'm all hoping you're using Yarn, Global, Add, and then you welcome. So this is how you install an Angular CLI, much like the same way you install Create React App, so nothing different. But the key here is in the support. Oops, I did a poo-poo. I didn't need to put that. So as you can see here, there's like a lot of stuff that you can cover. And this is what I meant by it has a really great tooling. Like, for example, you can use different ports, different hosts, and have proxy configs when you run into issues such as CORS. As I mentioned before, you can switch between different CSS. So if you don't like plain CSS, you can use to SCSS or SAS or less, or I'm pretty sure it can do PCSS, but not from the CLI. You'd have to you have to install PCSS extensions yourself. But after that, it works out of the box. Now I also mentioned ahead of time compilation, where it improves the render time by compiling stuff before deploying it, before you deploy it to somewhere. It also has Angular Universal, which is actually a side project currently being merged to the Angular and soon to be available in Angular CLI. We all know that server-side rendering is, well, it's very hard in many, like, regardless of what you're using, you need to pre-render the page so that crawlers can crawl, even though a lot of, like, I know that Googlebot can do Angular and React. You don't necessarily need to do server-side, but it's still kind of hit and miss. It's better to pre-render pages. So Angular Universal, much like, was it Next.js? Correct me if I'm wrong for React. Was it? For server-side rendering? You can do, it helps you basically to create pages, and then when you compile them and deploy on the server, you don't need to worry about the server-side rendering. Basically, the server will spit out the output for the crawler. And this is pretty much kind of the point. Like, you have a bunch of different options. I'm not going to go through all of them, but again, great tooling. But then if I look at the tooling of the same create, if I can type create React, yeah, it's impossible when you can't mirror stuff. Well, I meant to do that. Totally meant to do that. Yes. So when it comes to Create React App, you could argue that it's on point. And you would be right. It's on point for any user to start with. All you need to do is run Create React App name, and you're good to go. You don't need to worry about Webpack. You don't need to worry about anything. And this is kind of what I like about these tools, because that's the main thing that really kind of made me afraid of jumping into any framework. Once I started learning Webpack and I saw books written on it, like tutorials, hours long, it's like, what the hell? Wasn't it supposed to be easy for developers as well? No, apparently not. Apparently we have to suffer. But then I discovered all these tools, Angular CLI, Create React App, and they really eased the transition. Not to say you shouldn't learn Webpack. You should definitely check it out to understand more how it works and how you can extend it, because both tools allow you to eject your own project, and this is a big plus. But one thing that concerns me is that going through GitHub page of Create React App, if you want to switch between, for example, from CSS to SAS or SCSS or whatever, you have to perform manual manipulations. So you have to edit the files and then delete previous packages. If you use less, you have to uninstall less and then install SAS. You could say it takes 5 or 10 minutes for experienced developer, but for a less experienced person to jump in and just use a different technology, it could be a bit of a challenge. Where compared to in Angular, you could just run ng new project, and then you would just simply say styles equals SCSS. So that would mean that, hey, I'd like to use SCSS as my styles, and I don't need to do anything else. And the same goes for tests. If I don't want to run tests, I think it was tests or something like that. Yeah, tests, and then you click false. So that means that it's not going to produce any testing files for you if you don't care about that kind of thing.
No.
Was it? What was the option?
Of course you have to have tests.
I mean, you have to have tests, but like in my personal projects, I just go YOLO. I'm like, no tests.
Test
What are tests for? Just too truthy, and it's all fine. Everything is truthy. Nothing, like, what is it? Everything is allowed, nothing is forbidden, so I run without tests. To be fair, to confess, I never learned how to test, that's why I don't do it.
Yeah.
Sure, I should. I definitely should.
You will.
Yeah. I'm afraid what's going to happen after this presentation. Like, they're going to give me homework. Hey, here's your test. Yeah. But anyway, this is kind of like what I like about Angular CLI. It allows you to add all these different options. And apart from that, another cool feature that I really like about Angular, although I could say that this is not necessary for React, but everybody has boilerplate code. Everyone has some sort of snippets that they use, like common commands they run when they open an editor, like be it create a new React component and then it does everything for you. With Angular CLI, you don't need that kind of stuff. So for example, here I have some personal project and I have Angular, what was it? Can't type. There you go, Angular next. And then here, for example, if I want to have a new service, all I need to do is run ng create service. So C stands for create, S stands for service, and then the name of the service. So for example, I want it to be in services folder, and it will be called HTTPS call, for example. Now that would generate ng, not C, sorry, but G, and there you have it. So it would generate automatically the service for me with all the stuff, with all the imports. I don't need to care about anything. The only thing you could notice is that it says warning, service is generated but not provided. And this flows into my second point, where I think we should do it more as a convention in React, or maybe even as some sort of module if possible. Something that I adore, and I really mean adore, in Angular, is that you have this amazing app module file, a big TypeScript or JavaScript file where you run all your imports. For example, I remember I went into a big project once, like it was just an open source project I was playing around, and they had a humongous list in package.json. There were like 60, 70 dependencies for all I know they use there. But then when I look at their app.modules, they're using only a few. So this definitely helps you to organize what you're actually using versus what you have in a package.json. There is no reason to list it in a package.json so that unfortunate soul copies your project and then pulls a bunch of heavy dependencies that are not even used in your project. So having one file to rule them all and provide you with the necessary description, you could say, what you're using in your project, definitely streamlines the process and makes you understand a bit more. So I'm using, for example, here an HTTP client module, and I imported up above. So that gives me an indication, hey, I'm using some sort of HTTP request. And then if I create a new component, like in this case, I use the service, I created, what was the name of it? HTTPS call. So all I need to do is to go here, import it from services, and then HTTP call service, and then what was that? HTTPS call service. There you go. So now I imported the service itself. Why is it highlighting? Oh, I messed up import. Yep. So import. So now all I need to do is get it out there and put it in my providers. Now what that means in Angular is that any, oops, I messed up again. So basically HTTPS call service. It should be HTTPS call service. Anywho, the point is that then you put it in your providers file and it allows you to use it everywhere inside the project. Now, what would happen is it also prevents mistakes. So for example, let's get rid of both of these, and let's get rid of all the providers. So now what I have here is I have services folder, and for example here I also run the, this is difficult, HTTP service. So for here I have a very simple HTTP service, get data, and I have some Firebase with a number on it. And I use the HTTP from Angular HTTP. Now what would happen if I just used it like this? It would throw an error for me. So it means that, okay, I'm trying to use something that's not in my project. And then I go to app modules and import it. So it will also help you understand what kind of modules you import, what do you use, and just generally I find it better to understand. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that this definitely would benefit React if it had one big file where you import everything and just use it throughout the project. Could be good, could be bad. I do not necessarily have an idea how to implement it in a clean and concise way Angular does it, but that's just something I really enjoy from it. Now, let's talk about my favorite and the scariest topic, because I'm afraid I'm going to say something completely stupid, RxJS. So power of observables. Now, I discovered observables actually before I discovered promises, and I kind of like that I did that, because I read that a lot of developers find it difficult to understand observables when they jump from promises or even new async arrays. But basically, the power of observables is that, unlike with promises, when you call a promise, it can only have two values. It's either resolved or rejected. Well, it also has a status pending, but apart from that, it's either resolved or rejected. With RxJS, you not only can you interrupt anything that you do, it's a continuous value. So it continuously listens to whatever is happening. So you only need to subscribe once, and then you can use it wherever. And whenever something updates, it reflects on the whole project. So it observes for the value. And I believe that you should start using RxJS in your project compared to promises, especially if you work with real-time data, because it makes it much more streamlined than chaining a bunch of promises. So for example, here I have a simple file that fetches the JSON from the Firebase, and it updates it on observable timer. So So first of all, on ng-on init is basically the same as React's component did mount, pretty much, roughly. And then you call the function, and then it subscribes to the whole thing. So when I subscribe to the get request, it actually initiates it. So you can create a subscription, but not subscribe to it. So you can predefine a bunch of stuff and then only call it when you actually need it. Unlike when you create an HTTP request, it gets fired up automatically. So with observables, give you an option to create an observable and only call it when necessary. And after that, once I subscribe to it, it also executes subscribe for updates. Now this is very interesting, because this is where the power comes in. You set an observable timer, in my case it's 2 seconds, and you listen to that value. So whenever something happens, it updates my JSON, and it's being reflected on my project. Now the key here is that why I'm doing here a arrow function is because if I were to just call this .get number, it would be executed every 2 seconds. When I do it as an arrow function, it waits for that function to complete before calling it again. So that prevents a situation where a user is on a 2G or a 3G network. You set to update the data every 2 seconds, and then it fires up like 20 requests on a 2G or a 3G network. That can be devastating for a slow connection. So that way it waits for the previous operation to complete before waiting 2 seconds and then firing a new one. Would you like a demonstration of that, or are you aware of how it works?
Sure.
Sure? Yeah. So I can just copy paste the code from here. Let me get it out of here. And jump to my get data. Now before we run into any issues, let me import back my whole thing, except I don't need HTTPS call. I only need HTTP service. So it's already here. Okay, so now if I need to close this down safe. If I go to my HTTPS and copy this. Oops. No Q&A yet. No. 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 There you go. And then put it here. So now I need to get rid of the constructor. No, not constructor as a whole, but the function. And let me do a bit of easier coding here. If I look at it like this. But basically, there's actually something to talk about. You can do 2 ways in Angular how you can make an HTTP service. Now in React, you would do it in action creators. Angular's best practice, kind of as a bonus tip, you can create a service that gets the value, and then you initiate the service call instead of directly putting it in your component. But for the sake of actually simplicity, I'd say it's better if we do it quickly and dirty.
just take this out and take this out. It's not necessary at all. And then go to app component. So this is with the structure of the component itself. Get rid of the HTTP service here, and then paste this in here. Actually, I didn't need to get rid of the HTTP service. So HTTP service, import from HTTP service. Oh, actually, pardon me, this is what I meant by I'm gonna screw up. It's gonna take some time to complete everything. Deleted one too many lines. And now the last thing that I need are also the subscriptions. So I need these two things. So we're creating two subscriptions that we listen to, and then once they're resolved, they provide us with a value. So let's put them in here. Up, da, da. Yeah, don't worry. I'm gonna add subscriptions to this project. So they come from our XJS subscriptions. And now what we also need to do is we need to do private HTTP client, HTTP client, and then import that from, this is actually a new feature of Angular 2.4 if you haven't heard. You would have just a standard HTTP client, but recently they added a new method for Angular.common HTTP. So it's actually far more efficient because if you're expecting a JSON value, it automatically converts it for you. It does everything for you. It's basically practically the same as calling HTTP, then getting the value, then running .to.json. So this is kind of best convenience of this new module. So let me import HTTP client if I remember correctly, was it? Cannot find module. Oh, right. Yes. And did I import the correct version? HTTP client. Yes. Yes, I did. I'm awesome. Now, this is a perfect use case scenario because right now, if I were to save this and run ngserve, this is what would happen. I'm expecting it to fail because once it finishes building it, it's going to notice probably unless I'm super smart. Nope, I'm not. So declaration of statement is expected. Yes. It's because we're importing a bunch of stuff here, and we're also not importing the HTTP service in the app modules. So if now we need to add import from Angular common HTTP and import the module here. So we import HTTP client module. Now notice there's a key. Oh, I actually have it there. Ooh, I'm smart. But yeah, notice the difference. In app.modules, we import modules themselves. In components, we actually import the functions. So this is the actual key difference here of helping you to maintain your code. But let's see now if I can view the project. What is it complaining about? HTTP service. I'm not even using it anywhere. Yeah, this is not an error. I'm pretty sure I can just run this. I'm pretty sure we can just run this. So if we're on localhost 20, nope. What's happening here? Error in declaration or statement is expected. Where is it? Oh, my bad. My bad, people. I know the problem. Once again, newbie developer. See this? See this tiny thing? Interfaces. My favorite thing. I know Bekkis loves them. I know Eero loves them as well. Let's provide an interface so it stops complaining. And we also need to add on destroy. So we're going to destroy the object. This is basically cycle components, on init and on destroy. It's the same as component did mount, component did unmount. With subscriptions, if you're expecting if when you do a single page website and you're expecting to leave that particular page, it's a good practice with subscriptions to unsubscribe because otherwise they start leaking if the page is being revisited and then you have more and more subscriptions generated. So once you destroy or rather a person leaves the page, destroy the subscription or rather unsubscribe. So in here we need to also do on destroy and now we're good to go. Are we? No, we also need to import observable. And what is it? Property timer does not exist on No, it does. Why it doesn't? Yes, it does. Type of observable. It still messes up some. Oh, is it because of this one? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I still don't understand why it doesn't. Yeah, this complains just about typing. This timer should work. I generated the project with the timer. Type of timer. Let me see. Timer. No. What is it gonna give me? ToString. So what? All right, let me check this out. So it has title, number of subscription, observable, subscription, behavioral subject. Let me just do it like this. It's probably because I'm doing wrong imports. My bad. Yeah, it's doing it in an odd way. So we're just gonna run this, and we're gonna get rid of this. This is not necessary. So now everything should work as expected. So if I run observable.timer, yep, there you have it. Success. This is now a HTTP service. So all we need to do is just let's get rid of the service itself. Wonder, where am I using it even? I'm not importing it anywhere. HTTP service. I think it's generally complaining because something is wrong there. So, boom. Save. Angular next source app services failed to compile. Why? Well, let's rerun this. I'm not sure what kind of declaration is it expecting when the service is already down. Yeah, there you go. It's just a cached stuff, so congratulations. Thank you, thank you. Totally planned. I all planned this. But now, as you can see here, it shows me a different value every 2 seconds, roughly 2 seconds. And we can see this by going to the network tab and then seeing that, what the? Go away. I did not ask you to appear there. Anywho, size and time. So as you can see here, it's about it fires up really fast, like roughly every 400 milliseconds. Now here where the power comes in, I could throttle the network. So let me expand this. No, it's not. Nothing is gonna let me to do this. It said we're gonna make you fail. Wait, just go away. There you go. There we go. So let's expand this, and it says here no throttling. So we're gonna put slow 3G, and here you can start saying it's pending, and once it's done after 2 seconds, it waits another 2 seconds to fire up another request. So this is kind of the power of observables that I was talking about earlier. Is that if I were not to write an arrow function there, it would fire up requests the moment, next request straight after 2 seconds. And then it would bombard a slow 3G connection. And on the phone, it means a stupendously slow phone. On the desktop, it's not as severe, but you really don't want to get suddenly 10 different results, especially if the real-time data changes all the time. So this is kind of the power of observables and something that I really love. They're much more complex and they do much more than just doing AJAX calls. You can listen to button events, kind of do reactive programming. You traditionally, with pure JavaScript, you would do add event listener to a button, and then you, whenever someone clicks it, do something. With observables, you do just that. You observe and wait for the value to pop on its own. So you still register an event, but it goes from what would you call it, like a click-based programming to a reactive programming. So it would react to the user's interaction instead of user interacting with something. So whenever I press the button, it's not something that the button initiates, it's just you listen to a button. Or if, for example, the value changes, so instead of, let's say it says 10, not 8, it would change to 10, observables would react to the value change and perform necessary operations when you subscribe to them. So it kind of makes the whole approach quite a bit different from traditional, I click the button and something happened. But again, there's so much more to cover with observables than I actually possibly can know about them. So with that out of the way, these are kind of my points that I really think that we could start using in React projects, and React could use, with Angular, Angular team could really use
a different approach on a technology. They could really improve their rendering times. I really enjoy the speed of React and efficiency of React, and the fact that it really makes you a better. Oh, I'm terribly sorry.
No problem.
A better developer. A better developer with JavaScript. I could definitely agree that when you jump on the React bandwagon, you will definitely learn JavaScript more than you will learn with Angular, because Angular teaches you Angular. It's like comparing Java and Kotlin. Kotlin is better than Java, but you're learning Kotlin. Java doesn't do stuff the same way Kotlin does, but Kotlin kind of does them better. It's the same thing with Angular and React. Angular is what Kotlin to Java. It's a framework that comes with all the bells and whistles. It comes with stuff like regex expressions for emails, so you don't need to write your own. You just add a directive to your HTML. It provides you with tons of different other options, how to iterate through objects without running dot maps on your own and then figuring out all the quirks. It does, however, have far more complex DOM operations compared to React that utilizes the shadow DOM. It is far kind of, not so far, but less efficient in a lot of points when it comes to jump-starting your application. And where React, for example, really excels in speed, and it just, again, makes you only not worry about the rendering stuff. But to make it clear one more time, we are talking library versus framework. And this was never a true battle. Angular is better than React, or React is better than Angular. React is pluggable. Angular comes with, Angular is a tool set. Choose whatever is good for the job, and don't let anyone else say, hey, this is bad or this is good, you should utilize that. If you have any questions or diss me, please. Now is the time.
If you replace React with Vue.js, I think the result would be quite the same.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, Vue, I heard a bunch of good stuff about Vue.js, and it was also about the Mithril. I remember there was also a different framework that also kind of started claiming that it's the fastest framework out there. Library. But again, libraries are easy to replace. It's Lodash or be it immutable. Libraries are meant to be plugged into the project. When it comes to Angular, it is definitely harder to switch from React to Angular or from Angular to React. Yeah. But I like the fact that Angular separates files. As much as I enjoy the community of everything in JSX, I do think that it makes it clear to see what's meant to be in HTML and what's meant to be in JavaScript and what's meant to be in CSS. And you should definitely kind of, a word of warning is that when you use styled components in React, there seems to be an ongoing kind of warning that beware of modifying CSS based on user input when using styled components to avoid CSS injection. And then you definitely should watch out when you dynamically utilize style components to color something. Like, for example, if the user can change the color of their background on the profile or something, definitely sanitize everything that comes through. Otherwise, you're making yourself vulnerable to injection, and then all the values can be stolen. There's a great article, if anybody wants to read. I linked it in the Slack, let me find it in technology. Whatever. Oh, it started here. Good. You don't get to see private stuff, my stuff. So
I think it's really funny that I also read the CSS Injection today or a couple of days ago. I don't remember, but now we are in the point of history that the CSS Injection is possible. I wouldn't have believed that 10 years ago.
Yes. Yeah.
What?
Yeah. But basically, it's possible because of the combination of JavaScript and CSS. That's kind of the main concern that came out of it. A lot of people, I like styled components, but I never actually heard of CSS injection in JavaScript either. But apparently that's a thing. If you brush through this website, let me get my mouse. You have golden rule is never interpolate user input into your style sheets. This is the best advice I read about styled components. Not that I had an idea to do that in any of the projects, but it's good to know that if ever comes up that someone tells me, hey, we want a feature A in the project.
Nikki, what is the first rule of web development?
And we're just about running out of time. Thank you, everyone.
What is all user input?
Shit.
It's unsanitized. Yeah, it's evil.
So injections can happen everywhere.
Hmm.
Injections stay the same on the target changes through the years. So always validate and filter user input.
Filter user input. That sound that yeah. yeah. Let's filter. I agree. We should filter all the unnecessary stuff. But yeah, that's just a good article. I can give you a link to it if you ever actually need it, or there's some edge cases, because there's always edge cases that for some reason you need to use one thing or another. So that's about it. Anything else?
What was that plugin for the auto imports?
Oh, the prefixer?
No.
The VS Code.
Yeah, in VS Code.
Oh yeah, in VS Code I'm using TypeScript Hero.
So it's for TypeScript only.
Yes. I'm sure there is.
Because you type something and then it said like
One
you
sec.
want to import.
If you're using JavaScript or anything else, two things that you should install is Rainbow Prettier Post CSS Plastic Path IntelliSense. So this is the first one. This is what helps me to autocomplete the path itself to the file. So I don't need to remember, especially if it's nested somewhere down the drain. And the second one would be the npm IntelliSense. That one lets me actually do it like basically what's described here. When I write a value, require, and it also adds this sort of functionality, but it's less bulletproof.
But VS Code has this internet already.
Hmm?
VS Code has this without plugins.
Yeah, the imports itself, yeah. But when it comes to, like, for example, in here it's a bad example, but when you look at the app components and you see me importing behavior subject observable, you won't get that in VS Code, for example. It doesn't.
What do you mean?
Like, for example, here I'm importing subscription.
Yeah.
So if I press Control Space, it lets me know what kind of stuff I can import.
Yeah,
and that's
it's there.
It's there? Must have been fixed. Because I remember a couple of VS Code versions before, with Angular projects specifically. It did not work whatsoever.
Because I don't have those plugins anymore.
Okay. Then they must. I think they were working with like a generic TypeScript project or JavaScript. But when I started Angular and started using VS Code, I remember this was a nightmare to figure out, because I did not understand why. Like, there were two problems with the VS Code thing. First, it would let me import stuff, but it would import it from somewhere else. And then the second problem was that it wouldn't even show me what to import.
Yeah.
When I downloaded the npm IntelliSense and then the path one, suddenly they kind of overlaid on top and fixed the problem. I don't know what they did, but they managed to fix this up, and I've been using them ever since. They are quite a bit outdated, actually, so it's possible that stuff is fixed now, but I'm not ready to try.
Yeah.
If it works, don't touch it.
Yeah.
My favorite tip. If it works, don't touch it.
Where are you going to put the links?
That's a good
Articles
question.
and stuff.
That's a good question. But I can actually
Where?
post them. I can post them on the blog post, like right underneath, so you can
Post
then
the
later
plugins too.
post plugins too. Okay. I'll write a small blog post then about plugins and everything. So be on the lookout at Fraktio.
You have already.
I will. Since you requested and there seems to be an interest, I'll provide this medium type post about plugins and what I'm using. And but I have to say that as much as I love VS Code, I still tend to jump between VS Code and WebStorm. Like, there's a lot of quirks VS Code still doesn't cover very well. For example, formatting is really wonky in VS Code. You could use prettier, like if you like opinionated prettier, but if, for example, you don't like prettier, then the default JavaScript format for TypeScript or React is going to be broken as hell. It's going to, for example, in here, what it would do is that it would place all of these things on separate line. And in React with JSX, the div would be separated. Hey, here's an opening arrow, here's div, and then there's a closing arrow, 3 lines. And then your ESLint is going to raise the alarm, like, what are you doing? So that kind of thing. Like, for example, formatting is one big problem. There were a couple of other things, although I can't immediately remember them since I'm using so many plugins that they seem to solve all the problems.
At least I'm using like ESLint and Prettier together, and it works like perfectly. I'm so happy with it because with the PRs you don't have to fight against with the other guy. Like Put this bracket here. Like, no, Prettier does it.
Yeah, I really like the prettier concept, and I actually especially like the fact that you can now. This is also another plugin I
What is
discovered.
that?
This is another plugin which the name is.
This is also a funny thing that if you take the back in the days, there was no things like a plugins in the editor. You just had the editor and stick with that.
Import cost.
Now it just everybody has some sort of orgy of plugins, and hell breaks loose when some plugin is out of date or something like that. Soon you need to have some sort of version control for the plugins.
Does that sound familiar to how you work with NPM packages?
Yes.
The deep we call node modules.
Yeah. So you in your project you have your NPM, but you need to have a different kind of NPM for just your editor. So everybody from in the same project have the same configuration.
Yeah, you have like the log file for that IDE.
Yes.
These editors already have the package managers.
Yes. Yes.
It's insane.
But it started being Inception. Next there's a new layer for that.
You mean
Package
project-wise
management for
plugins
package
editors.
management.
Yeah.
What if you have different package managers for the IDE, like that you manage those?
But that's why our idea that we had about package manager managing package managers is good.
Yeah, exactly.
And then we need a package manager for that. I mean, we already have an Inception with ad blockers. First we had ads, then we had ad blockers, then we have ad blockers blockers for ad blockers, and now we have an ad blocker that blocks the ad blocker. And I'm confused.
Yeah.
I saw the battle like it's an infinite fight. So we're not too far from that. But hey.
It was great talk because I was like, maybe this Angular thing. But then I was like, nah. But it's good.
Yeah. Well, again, I agree that a lot of people don't like it, and you have all the right. I just like that. I think it's far faster to prototype with Angular than it is with React, because you need to make sure everything works.
What projects have you done with Angular?
Like,
is there something in production?
Yeah, self-advertisement, but this is kind of the project I've done with Angular, if I can spell it correctly. Was it like this? I don't. Why it doesn't let me autocomplete? It should let me know. No.
Agent Smith.
Smed Brothers.
Was it like this? No. I don't.
You don't know what
You can buy that now.
Oh, I know. It all works out. Yes.
You might have end up on a port.
There you go. Yes, that's. I remembered. No, but I'm not interested in prothesis. So.
Zombie medicine.
Zombie medicine. Yes.
Yeah. Well, it's better. I expect it's something illegal, weapons or human trafficking.
Yeah.
It's worth it.
But it's zombie trafficking. That's fine. They are corpses.
Yeah. But this is like a production website I did with Angular, and they're selling endoprothesis. They operate in Russia, and basically
T-shirt products, shoulder.
Sorry, a
Shoulder,
distributor
yes.
of what?
endoprothesis. So if you don't have a bone or you shattered your knee, hospitals can buy items and put that into you. Or it's also going to be
Making you a zombie.
yes.
Yeah, half man.
If you're not nice to me, this is what I'm going to put into you.
From behind.
Oh.
From behind.
Angular.
With Angular while screaming, "NG serve, NG build."
You know, Nikki, something. I would rather take that inside of me rather than Angular.
I was waiting for when you're gonna make
Something about critical products and Angular also.
pretty much.
Because did you say that you were previously at Tieto?
Yeah, I unfortunately all the projects I've done are internal projects, so I can't talk about them or showcase them otherwise. The only thing I can say is that during all the hackathons through the industry hack, I did all of them in Angular because they just let me generate a bunch of components, fill in the stuff, and showcase, and everything works everywhere.
What you were doing?
One second, one by one.
So, I have a question, this little story. Back in the days, I worked with one project with old Angular first edition.
The Angular JS.
Yeah. And I found out that in the project that the problem with Angular is I kind of like the separation, as you say, but the kind of the HTML or whatever that awful syntax is, it was quite hard to understand, and it's not like it wasn't obvious what is there, and you need to have this your like own Angular only mindset, and you need to like debug what the hell is actually putting in there. It wasn't the HTML. You couldn't read it. It was something that you could only kind of understand if you have the other part, the separation, what actually the functions do.
Yeah.
So the separation didn't kind of work me because it was like some sort of a code that this cryptic code that I need to bold how to make any sense. I just couldn't look the HTML and get what's going on there. So is that better on the new Angular?
Yes, it is much, much better. Even creators of Angular themselves said like they really messed up and made a spaghetti code out of directives in AngularJS. With Angular 2, there is a common convention when it comes to directives nowadays. So you no longer need to wonder what kind of directives are you putting. So is it ng-repeat or is it ng-repeat with camel case? So they had these sort of weird mixes. Now everything is fairly simple. So when you write a directive, well, this is pseudocode. Don't try to run it like this here. But you would just write asterisks ng4, and then there you go. So here you type whatever is that you want to type. And the convention here is that, for example, imagine I would have an array of items. I would write let's item. So the very same way I declare a variable in JavaScript, it's exactly the same here. Let item of items. So that's it. Now what happens is it's going to iterate it, and for me to display the value, all I need to do is kind of the same thing you would do in React, except you would use double curly braces and use the word item. So this is how it would iterate, for example, with ng4. With AngularJS, you would need to do ng-repeat, and then there's a bunch of different syntaxes you can use. There's also a hell of a problem with using like multiple directives or pipe stuff.
Yes.
So with Angular 2, there's a common convention. It's asterisk and camel case. So you don't need to think about any different edge cases. It's kind of similar to how React does it. Instead of class, you have a class name and that kind of stuff. So it's very similar in a sense. Except in React, of course, you don't operate on values and directives, but in Angular, you do.
We're working at Tieto when the value for life came.
Yes, I was the one to discover it first.
Oh.
And put it in the channel asking, is this something that...
What were you doing during the recordings?
I wasn't there. Actually, I was
some kind of whistleblower or something.
Actually, my friend is a whistleblower.
Internal marketing video. Kaboom.
As much as I'd like to take credit, it wasn't me who leaked it. It was, actually, I did not even know that it existed before my friend messaged me. Is this for real?
What's your friend's name?
But you know the deep throat.
Yeah. What?
Abstain from the answer. I admit nothing.
That's the probably best you can say.
Yes. But yeah, my sources are very reliable, and I don't disclose my CIs. Disclose. So, yeah. But basically, he pointed me out to the video, and then I watched the video, and I was like, whoa.
Ah.
All right.
He.
I already said it's a he.
Yeah,
It's a he. He's gonna be a
You
fan.
narrow it down to 50%.
Nice. Or 90.
Or 99% of like software people.
And,
Yeah,
and it's in the Tieto.
He's not from Tieto, so
Information.
that
Okay, just keep on standing there. We're gonna find out more.
But this
and
is
more.
kind of info I want to feed to him because I want to see how far can he go.
Yeah.
He thinks it's a game for him. It's a game for me as well. I want to see the challenge.
Our friends at Tieto are watching at the moment, taking notes.
He wasn't the one who leaked it either. He saw it in the freaking video and then he sent it. Well, it's hilarious. I have to say, I never saw it. It never saw the light of day internally when I was working there. But I mean, as idea, it's not bad. But I have to say, I'm more disgusted by the fact that 360p version was leaked, not 1080p. I thought that was a standard by now. That's kind of the main offender, to be honest.
Well, they took quality in many different ways.
I guess I guess. Well, maybe they were trying to spark your imagination. See how anti-aliasing works in your eyes. Can you smooth the edges by yourself?
Yeah.
No cyborgs in here, no.
Okay.
Golf uploaded.
Oli muuten tän
Syksyn
syksyn paras presis.
Top 5.
Ja
Top
Nikin presiksistä 2 parhaan joukossa.
Top 3 mun mielestä.
Top 3.
Is it still on?
Is it still on? 1 second, guys.
Bye bye.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.